Your Honor, this is a messy breakup, not a cage. I'll pay restitution today. Just give me a number and I'm out.
Welcome to my courtroom. You know, there is a misconception about what happens when I ascend these steps and take my seat behind this bench. People look at the high ceilings, the polished wood, the state seal hanging above my head, and they think this is a place of negotiation. They think the law is a conversation, a fluid thing that bends to the will of the loudest voice or the most expensive suit. They watch the proceedings on their screens, and they mistake the theater of the courtroom for a game. But they are gravely mistaken. After years of looking into the eyes of both the predators and the prey, I have learned that this bench is not a stage for performance. It is a wall. It is the final barrier between civilized society and absolute chaos. My job isn't to be a friend. My job isn't to hold your hand or ask you about your childhood to excuse your present actions. My job is to ensure that when you walk through those doors, you understand that actions have consequences, consequences that are often swift, severe, and absolute. On this particular Thursday, the air in the courtroom felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the weather. Outside, the sky was a brilliant, deceptive blue. No, the heaviness came from inside. It was a thick, electric tension that you could taste on the back of your tongue. My bailiff, a man who has stood by my side through riots and tears, gave me a look as I sat down. He didn't need to say a word. We both knew what was on the docket. We both knew who was waiting in the holding cell. The gallery was packed. It usually is. But today the silence was different. It wasn't the respectful silence of citizens observing justice. It was the held breath of a crowd waiting for a collision. I adjusted my glasses, opened the file in front of me, and let my eyes scan the charges. Assault, harassment, disorderly conduct. But words on a page are sterile. They are black ink on white paper. They don't scream, they don't bleed, and they certainly don't cry. Bring him out, I said. My voice didn't need to be loud to carry. In my courtroom, I don't shout unless I have to. And when I do, you'll wish you were anywhere else on earth. The side door opened, and the clinking of chains was the first sound to cut through the quiet. Then he stepped in. His name was Marcus. He didn't look like a man facing a maximum sentence. He didn't have the bowed head of the remorseful or the trembling hands of the terrified. He walked in with a strut, a rhythmic, arrogant bounce in his step that seemed to mock the very floor of the courthouse. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people in this room make in a month, but he wore it like a costume, not a uniform of respect. But it wasn't his walk that made my blood run cold, it was his face. Most defendants, when they see me, they freeze. They see the reputation before they see the person. But Marcus, he was smiling. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a wide, toothy, predatory grin. He looked around the courtroom not like a man on trial, but like a guest of honor at a party thrown solely for his amusement. He caught the eye of his attorney and winked. Winked, as if this entire process, the centuries of legal tradition, the pain of the victims, and the authority of this court were nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his schedule. I sat there, stone-faced, watching him approach the defense table. I didn't pick up my gavel. I didn't look at the paperwork. I just watched him. I studied him like a scientist studies a virus. I wanted to see just how deep the rot went. And then I saw her. In the front row of the gallery, sitting small and huddled into herself, was the victim. She was trying to make herself invisible, her eyes fixed on her lap, her hands gripping a tissue so tightly her knuckles were white. And that is when it happened. As Marcus sat down, the chains on his wrists rattling against the table, he turned his head. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at her, and he laughed. It was a short, sharp, cruel sound, a bark of amusement that echoed off the mahogany walls. It was the sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. He looked at the tears streaming down her face, and he found it funny. In that split second, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to volatile. He thought he was the most powerful person in the room. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. That laughter hung in the air like toxic smoke. It was a sound that didn't just disrespect the court, it desecrated the very concept of human decency. In that moment, the file on my desk became irrelevant. The charges of assault and disorderly conduct were just legal terms for a behavior that was much more primal and much more dangerous. I didn't reach for my gavel. I didn't need to. I simply leaned forward, resting my chin on my clasped hands, and I stared at him. The silence that followed his laugh was deafening. Even his attorney, a man who makes his living defending the indefensible, looked down at his shoes, clearly wishing he could dissolve into the floorboards. Marcus, sensing that the reaction wasn't what he expected, finally turned his eyes toward the bench. He was still smiling, but the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He was waiting for me to yell. He was waiting for the standard judicial reprimand so he could roll his eyes and play the misunderstood rebel. But I gave him nothing. I gave him silence. And silence to a narcissist is torture. Mr. Davenport, I finally said. My voice was low, barely above a whisper. But in that acoustically perfect room, it sounded like thunder rolling in the distance. Do you find something amusing about the proceedings today? He stood up, not waiting for his lawyer to guide him. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish, a gesture practiced in front of a mirror 1,000 times. Well, Your Honor, he said, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. I just find the whole situation a bit theatrical. The crying, the drama. It's a bit much, don't you think? I didn't blink. I didn't shift in my chair. I just let his words hang there, exposing him. Theatrical, I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. You think the pain of the woman sitting behind you is a performance? You think the bruises documented in Exhibit A are stage makeup? He shrugged, a dismissal so casual it made my blood boil. People get emotional, Judge. It's not a crime to have a sense of humor. In this room, I said, my voice hardening into steel, your sense of humor is irrelevant. In this room, you are not a critic reviewing a play. You are a defendant facing the loss of your liberty. I picked up the stack of photos from the file images of the victim's face, swollen and purple from the night in question. I held them up, not to the court, but directly at him. Is this funny to you, Mr. Davenport? Does this make you want to laugh? For the first time, the smile faltered. Just for a second, his eyes darted to the photos and then quickly away. He licked his lips. The arrogance was still there, but cracks were forming in the porcelain. He was realizing that his charm, which likely worked in the boardrooms and bars he frequented, had no currency here. I didn't do that, he muttered, the bravado slipping just an inch. We haven't gotten to the verdict yet. I cut him off sharply. We are establishing the ground rules of my courtroom. And rule number 1 is this. You do not mock the suffering of others in my presence. You looked at that woman, a woman who is clearly terrified of you, and you laughed. You tried to diminish her. You tried to make her feel small so you could feel big. I stood up then. The movement was sudden, and it made the bailiff take a half step forward, his hand resting on his belt. I walked to the edge of the bench, towering over the defense table. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Marcus. I don't see a successful businessman. I don't see a charming rogue. I see a bully in a $3,000 suit. And bullies, well, they tend not to do very well when they can't scare the person standing in front of them. The courtroom was frozen. The victim had stopped crying and was looking up, eyes wide, realizing for the first time that someone was actually standing between her and him. Marcus shifted his weight. He put his hands in his pockets, then took them out. The smile was gone now, replaced by a look of annoyance, a look of someone who is used to getting their way and is suddenly facing a wall they cannot climb. I have discretion in sentencing, I continued, my voice returning to that dangerous, quiet calm. I have a wide range of options available to me, and usually, a defendant's demeanor plays a significant role in which option I choose. You walked in here thinking you owned the place. You laughed thinking you were untouchable. But let me assure you, the only thing you own right now is the silence in this room. And as for being untouchable, we are about to see just how fragile your reality truly is. The trial began, not with a bang, but with the slow, methodical peeling back of layers. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Miss Sterling, who has argued before me for a decade, stood up. She didn't need theatrics. She had the facts. And in my courtroom, facts are the only currency that matters. She began to lay out the timeline of the night in question. It was a simple story, really. A story as old as time. A man who couldn't handle rejection. A man whose ego was so fragile that a no felt like a declaration of war. I watched Marcus as the charges were read in detail. Most defendants, even the hardened ones, shift a little when their crimes are spoken aloud. They look at their hands, they drink water, they try to disassociate from the person being described, but not Marcus. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest as if he were watching a boring movie he had seen a dozen times before. He picked a piece of lint off his expensive lapel. He checked his watch. He was broadcasting boredom, a calculated signal to everyone in the room that he was above this. Then, the victim was called to the stand. Her name was Elena. Walking to the witness box, she looked like she was walking to her execution. She was trembling so hard I could see the fabric of her blouse shaking. She kept her eyes on the floor, terrified to look in Marcus's direction. And who could blame her? The last time she saw him, he was turning her world upside down. As she took the oath, her voice was barely a whisper. I had to lean forward and gently ask her to speak into the microphone. Take your time, Miss Gomez, I said. You are safe here. No one is going to hurt you in this room. She nodded, tears already welling up again. She began to testify. She spoke about the text messages, hundreds of them, swinging from desperate love to violent threats in the span of minutes. She spoke about the night he showed up at her workplace, the way he screamed until security had to be called. She spoke about the fear of walking to her car, the fear of hearing a knock at her door, the fear that had become the background noise of her entire life. And what was Marcus doing while this woman poured her trauma out for the record? He was rolling his eyes. He was whispering to his lawyer, covering his mouth with his hand but letting out audible sighs of exasperation. At one point, when Elena described how he had grabbed her arm, Marcus actually shook his head and let out a scoff, a tisk sound that cut through her testimony like a knife. I felt the temperature in my blood rise. Every instinct in me wanted to stop the proceedings and drag him out myself. But I am a judge. I must be impartial until the gavel falls. I must let the process play out so that when the hammer comes down, there is no appeal, no loophole, no escape. So I watched. I cataloged every smirk, every eye roll, every disrespectful gesture. I was building a mental file that would sit right on top of the legal one. He told me that no one would believe me. Elena stammered, gripping the railing of the witness box. He said he had money, and I had nothing. He said he could buy his way out of anything. The prosecutor paused, letting those words sink into the jury, into the gallery, into me. And did you believe him, Miss Gomez? Yes, she whispered. Look at him. He's laughing. We all looked. And he was. It wasn't the loud bark from earlier, but a smirk, a tight, amused smile, as if he knew a secret that the rest of us were too stupid to understand. He was confirming her testimony in real time. He was proving her right. He was showing us exactly who he was. A man who used his wealth not just as a shield, but as a weapon. I interrupted then. Mr. Davenport, I said, my voice cutting through the testimony, is there something factually incorrect about the witness's statement that requires a facial expression? His lawyer shot up. Objection, Your Honor. My client is simply reacting to. Overruled, I snapped, not looking at the lawyer. My eyes were locked on Marcus. I am asking your client. You seem to find the witness's fear amusing. You seem to think that the idea of you buying your way out of justice is a punchline. Is that right? Marcus straightened his tie, looking bored. I just think she's dramatic, Judge. We had a bad breakup. She's emotional. It's cute, in a sad way. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall to call a woman's terror cute, the gallery gasped. Even the court reporter paused, her hands hovering over the keys, shocked by the callousness of the statement. Cute, I repeated, letting the word hang there. You think terror is cute. You think intimidation is a bad breakup. Let me tell you something about this courtroom, Mr. Davenport. We strip away the money here. We strip away the suits. We strip away the arrogance. And what is usually left underneath is very small, very scared, and very pathetic. You are showing me exactly who you are. And believe me, I am watching. I turned back to Elena. Please continue, Miss Gomez. And do not look at him. Look at me. He has no power here. I do. The rest of Elena's testimony was a painful exercise in truth-telling. She didn't scream. She didn't exaggerate. She simply narrated the systematic dismantling of her spirit by the man sitting 10 feet away. When she stepped down from the stand, she didn't look triumphant. She looked exhausted, like a soldier who had walked miles with a heavy pack and finally, for the first time, was allowed to set it down. Then came the defense. Marcus's lawyer, a man who looked like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this specific moment, tried his best. He tried to paint Elena as unstable, as jealous, as a woman scorned. But it was impossible to sell that narrative when his client was sitting right there, actively proving every single thing the victim had said. Every time the lawyer tried to suggest Marcus was a gentle soul, Marcus would scoff or check his fingernails. He was sabotaging his own defense with the efficiency of a demolition crew. Against all legal advice, and I could see the panic in his attorney's eyes, Marcus insisted on taking the stand. This is often the moment where narcissists destroy themselves. They believe so fully in their own charm, their own version of reality, that they think they can talk their way out of a bear trap. He buttoned his jacket as he walked to the witness box, giving a little nod to the jury as if he were running for mayor. He sat down, leaned into the microphone, and smiled that same oily smile. "Mr. Davenport," his lawyer asked, trying to keep him on a tight leash, "did you ever threaten Miss Gomez?" Marcus chuckled. "Threaten? No," I advised her. "Elena needs guidance. She gets confused. I was just trying to help her make better decisions. Sometimes you have to be firm with people who don't know what's good for them." The courtroom went deadly silent. He had just admitted to the controlling behavior under the guise of benevolence. He didn't see it as abuse. He saw it as ownership. The prosecutor, Miss Sterling, stood up for cross-examination. She didn't need to be aggressive. She just needed to open the door and let him walk through it. "So, when you showed up at her job screaming, that was guidance?" "I wasn't screaming," Marcus corrected, his tone condescending. "I was projecting my voice." She wasn't listening. I hate it when people don't listen. It's disrespectful. I demand respect. "And when she tried to leave?" Miss Sterling asked. "She can't leave until we're done talking," Marcus said, his eyes flashing with a sudden, dark intensity. "You don't just walk away from me. That's not how it works." He said it with such conviction, such absolute certainty, that he didn't even realize he had just confessed to false imprisonment and harassment. He looked around the room, expecting nods of agreement. Instead, he saw the horrified faces of the jury, but he didn't care about them. He looked up at me, giving me a conspiratorial look, as if one powerful person to another, I would understand the burden of dealing with difficult people. I stared back at him, my face a mask of stone. "You may step down, Mr. Davenport," I said. "I think we have heard everything we need to hear." He walked back to his table, looking satisfied. He thought he had crushed it. He thought he had explained himself perfectly. He whispered something to his lawyer and laughed again. He was living in a fantasy world where consequences were things that happened to other people, poor people, people without his last name. The verdict came back in record time. Usually, juries deliberate for hours, sometimes days. They were back in 45 minutes. Guilty, 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 on every single count. Assault, harassment, disorderly conduct, intimidation. As the foreman read the verdict, I watched Marcus. I expected the smile to drop. I expected the reality to finally crash down on him. But it didn't. He shook his head, letting out a breath of annoyance, like he had just been told his table at a restaurant wasn't ready yet. He leaned over to his lawyer and spoke loud enough for me to hear. "Appeal it. Fix this. I'm not doing time. I have a flight to Cabo on Tuesday." He still didn't get it. He thought the guilty verdict was just a negotiation tactic, the opening bid in a transaction he could buy his way out of. He stood up as the jury was dismissed, checking his phone as if the proceedings were over. "Mr. Davenport," I said. My voice was different now. The trial was over. The impartiality was no longer required. Now, I was just the hammer. "Sit down." He looked up, surprised. "We're done, aren't we?" "My lawyer will handle the sentencing paperwork." "Sit down." I didn't shout, but the command hit him like a physical blow. He slowly lowered himself back into the chair, looking confused. "Sentencing is not a paperwork issue," I said. opening the file that contained the sentencing guidelines and the victim impact statement. Sentencing happens now, and I suggest you cancel your flight to Cabo. You won't be needing it. Cancel my flight? He repeated the words as if I had spoken in a foreign language. He let out a scoff, shaking his head. Judge, with all due respect, I have business engagements. I can pay whatever fine you decide on right now. I have my checkbook in my jacket. Let's just put a number on this and move on. He reached into his inner pocket. That was the moment the last shred of my patience evaporated. Bailiff! My voice cracked through the air like a whip. Secure the defendant's hands. The bailiff moved instantly. Marcus flinched, pulling his hand back as if he had been burned. Whoa! Hey! What is this? I'm writing a check. You are not writing anything, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. You seem to be laboring under a delusion, Mr. Davenport. You seem to believe that justice is a commodity. You think you can purchase your freedom the same way you purchase your suits or your vacations. But you are about to learn a very painful lesson about the currency of this courtroom. Here, we do not trade in dollars. We trade in time. And you are about to go bankrupt. The bailiff pulled Marcus's hands behind his back. For the first time, the arrogance wavered. He looked at his lawyer, eyes wide. Do something! Why are they handcuffing me? His lawyer stood up, pale and sweating. Your Honor, we request a sentencing hearing at a later date. We need time to prepare character witnesses. Denied. I cut him off. I have seen all the character I need to see right here in this room. I watched him for 3 days. I watched him laugh while his victim cried. I watched him roll his eyes while she described her trauma. I heard him call domestic abuse, guidance, and terror cute. I don't need a parade of his golf buddies coming in here to tell me he's a good guy. His actions have spoken louder than any witness ever could. I picked up the victim impact statement. I read this while the jury was deliberating, I said, holding up the paper. Elena writes that she sleeps with the lights on. She writes that she jumps every time her phone vibrates. She writes that she feels like a prisoner in her own life because of you. And while she was reading this statement into the record earlier, do you remember what you did, Mr. Davenport? He didn't answer. He was breathing hard now, the reality of the handcuffs finally sinking in. You checked your watch? I answered for him. You checked your watch because her pain was boring to you? You were inconvenienced by the suffering you caused? Well, let me solve that inconvenience for you. You won't have to worry about meetings, or flights, or checkbooks for a very long time. I looked at the sentencing guidelines. The state recommends probation and anger management classes, I said, reading the paper with disdain. Marcus relaxed slightly, his shoulders dropping. He thought he had won. He thought the system was going to slap him on the wrist like it always did. However, I continued, closing the folder with a heavy thud. Guidelines are just that, guidelines. They are recommendations, but in cases where there is a complete lack of remorse, a total disregard for the court's authority, and a clear, present danger to the victim, I have the discretion to deviate. And Mr. Davenport, you have earned every single second of that deviation. I am revoking your bond effectively immediately, I announced. Revoking? Marcus shouted, struggling against the bailiff's grip. You can't do that. I'm not a flight risk. You just told me you have a flight to Cabo on Tuesday, I snapped back. You literally announced your travel plans to the court. You are the definition of a flight risk. But more than that, you are a danger. A man who laughs at his victim's tears is a man who will not hesitate to make her cry again the moment he walks out those doors. And I will not have that on my conscience. I picked up my pen. Regarding count 1, assault in the 3rd degree, the maximum penalty is 1 year. Regarding count 2, harassment, the maximum penalty is 6 months. Regarding count 3, disorderly conduct, 30 days. Marcus was shaking his head frantically. Okay, look, I'm sorry, all right? I'm sorry she got upset. I'm sorry I laughed. Just let me go home. Please. Oh, now you're sorry? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Now that the cuffs are on? Now that the checkbook is useless? That isn't remorse, Marcus. That is fear. And frankly, it's about time you felt some... I looked him dead in the eye. I am sentencing you to the maximum time allowed by law on all counts. 1 year, plus 6 months, plus 30 days. Consecutive, I added, driving the final nail into the coffin. Not concurrent. You will serve them one after the other. That is nearly 2 years in the county jail. No Cabo, no suits, no guidance. Just you and four walls. The words 2 years hit the room like a physical shockwave. For a split second, Marcus just stood there, his mouth open, processing the math. Then the explosion happened. The cool, detached facade he had maintained for 3 days didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. 2 years? He screamed, his voice cracking, losing all its smooth baritone quality. For text messages? For yelling? This is insane. You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply leaned into the microphone, my eyes locking onto his frantic, sweating face. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Davenport. That is precisely why I am doing this. You are a man who has never heard the word no in his entire life. You are a man who believes that consequences are for other people. Well, welcome to the real world. In the real world, you don't get to abuse people just because you pay a higher tax bracket. He turned to his lawyer, desperate now, pulling against the handcuffs. Fix this. Call my father. Do something. His lawyer, to his credit, just shook his head slowly. He knew it was over. He knew that any attempt to argue now would only result in contempt charges. He started packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the blast radius. There is no one to call, Marcus, I said, my voice cold and final. Your father isn't the judge here. I am. And unlike the people you are used to dealing with, I am not for sale. You tried to buy your way out of accountability with a checkbook. When that didn't work, you tried to charm your way out with a smile. And when that failed, you tried to intimidate. You have run out of tricks. I pointed a finger at him. Look at me. Look at me right now. He stopped struggling. He looked up, his face red, his hair disheveled, the expensive suit now bunching up awkwardly around his restrained arms. I noticed something, I said softly. I don't see that smile anymore. Where did it go? 5 minutes ago, you were laughing. You were winking. You found the suffering of Miss Gomez to be a source of entertainment. Why aren't you laughing now, Mr. Davenport? Is the reality of the county jail not cute enough for you? He didn't answer. He couldn't. The bully had been stripped naked in front of the world. Without his freedom, and without his perceived power, he was nothing. I turned my attention to the gallery, specifically to the front row where Elena was sitting. She wasn't crying anymore. She was sitting up straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see fear in her eyes. I saw relief. She realized that the monster wasn't 10 feet tall. He was just a small man in handcuffs. Miss Gomez, I said, addressing her directly, I want you to know something. When you walk out of here today, you walk out alone. He does not follow you. He does not text you. He does not drive by your house. The state of Texas has taken physical custody of his body, and this court has issued a lifetime protective order. If he so much as breathes in your direction when he gets out, he goes back in. Do you understand? She nodded, a fresh tear rolling down her cheek, but this was a tear of liberation, not terror. Thank you, Judge, she whispered. I turned back to Marcus. He was slumped now, defeated. The fight had gone out of him as quickly as it had arrived. You treated this woman like property, I told him, my voice filled with disdain. You tried to control where she went, who she spoke to, and how she lived. You stole her peace. You stole her safety. So, it is only fitting that the law now takes the one thing you value most, your autonomy. You used your freedom to destroy hers. Now, I am using my authority to take yours. I looked at the bailiff. Mr. Deputy, take him into custody. He begins his sentence immediately. Wait! Marcus shouted one last time as the bailiff grabbed his arm. Judge, please, I can't go to jail. I have claustrophobia. I have anxiety. You can't put me in a cell. I almost laughed. Almost. Anxiety? I repeated. You gave that woman anxiety for 2 years. You made her afraid to walk to her own car. You made her afraid to sleep in her own bed. Now you want me to care about your comfort? You want me to consider your feelings? I picked up my gavel, holding it suspended in the air for a moment. You wanted attention, Marcus. You wanted to be the center of the room. You wanted to put on a show. Well, here is your grand finale. I brought the gavel down. Bam. It wasn't just a sound. It was a punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very ugly sentence. The strike echoed through the courtroom, vibrating in the chests of everyone present. For Marcus, that sound was the death knell of his old life. The bailiffs didn't handle him gently. They didn't need to be rough, but they were firm, gripping him by the elbows and marching him toward the side door, the door that leads not to the lobby, but to the holding cells, and eventually to the transport van. He didn't walk out with that strut he had walked in with. His legs were dragging, his expensive Italian leather shoes scuffing against the linoleum floor. He was looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide and desperate, scanning the room for anyone who could save him. He looked at his lawyer, who was busy stuffing papers into his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact. He looked at his friends in the back row, who were now sitting frozen, terrified that guilt by association might be a real thing in my courtroom. "This is a mistake," Marcus wailed, his voice echoing in the hallway even after he crossed the threshold. "You can't do this. I have money. I have rights." Then the heavy metal door clicked shut. Clang. And just like that, the noise stopped. The arrogance, the insults, the laughter, it was all sucked out of the room, leaving behind a silence that felt scrubbed clean. I sat back in my chair, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 days. The empty defense table looked different now. 5 minutes ago, it was occupied by a man who thought he was a king. Now, it was just a piece of wood. It was a stark reminder of how quickly the trappings of power can vanish when they aren't backed up by character. I looked out at the gallery. The people were stunned. They aren't used to seeing wealthy men held accountable. They are used to seeing plea deals, suspended sentences, and slaps on the wrist. They are used to a justice system that works differently depending on the balance of your bank account. But not today. Today, they saw the machine work the way it was designed to work. "Let the record reflect," I said, my voice breaking the silence, "that the defendant has been remanded into custody to begin serving his sentence immediately." I turned my chair slightly to face the audience. I don't usually give speeches after a verdict, but this felt necessary. The air needed to be cleared. The lesson needed to be solidified. "I want everyone in this room to understand what just happened," I said, scanning the faces in the pews. "Some of you might think that sentence was harsh. Some of you might think 2 years is a long time for what started as a domestic dispute, but you need to look at the context. We cannot have a society where people are allowed to terrorize others simply because they feel entitled to do so." I pointed to the spot where Marcus had stood. That man didn't just break the law, he broke the social contract. He believed that his comfort was more important than another human being's safety. He laughed at pain, and when you laugh at pain in a place designed to heal it, you are insulting the very foundation of justice. I will not tolerate that disrespect, not to this court, and certainly not to the victims who come here seeking protection. I shifted my gaze to Elena. She was standing up now, gathering her purse. She looked like she had grown 3 inches taller in the last 10 minutes. The slump in her shoulders was gone. The trembling had stopped. She looked at me, and she didn't need to say a word. Her eyes said it all. She was free. "Miss Gomez," I said gently, "you are excused. The bailiff will escort you to your vehicle to ensure you get home safely. You don't have to worry about him anymore. He is no longer a part of your story. Today, you turn the page." She nodded, a small, genuine smile touching her lips, the first real smile I had seen on her face since the trial began. She turned and walked down the center aisle. She didn't look back at the holding cell. She walked straight toward the sunlight streaming through the back doors. As the heavy doors swung shut behind her, I picked up the next file on my docket. The show goes on. The wheel of justice keeps turning. But I took a moment, just a second, to look at my hands. They were steady. I knew I had made the right call. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance. Marcus had tipped the scales with his cruelty, and I had simply leveled them back out. "Madam Clerk," I said, my voice returning to its businesslike tone, "call the next case." But the room hadn't fully recovered yet. The energy was still vibrating. The other attorneys waiting for their turn were sitting up straighter. They were checking their ties, reviewing their notes, making sure their clients were behaving. A message had been sent. loud and clear, do not come into Judge Boyd's courtroom and think you can play games. Because in this room, the house always wins. And the house is built on order. When I finally stepped down from the bench that evening, the courthouse was quiet. The crowds had dispersed, the cameras were off, and the janitorial staff was beginning their nightly rhythm of buffing the floors. I walked back to my chambers, removed my robe, and hung it on the hook behind the door. Without the robe, I am just a citizen. But with it, I am an instrument of something far older and far more important than myself. I sat at my desk and poured a glass of water, my mind drifting back to Marcus Davenport. I thought about that smile, that arrogant, untouchable smirk that he wore like armor. He represents a specific kind of disease that infects our society, the belief that if you have enough money, enough connections, and enough audacity, the rules simply do not apply to you. He thought the courtroom was just another boardroom where he could negotiate a deal. He thought the victim was just another employee he could intimidate into silence. But today, he learned the brutal arithmetic of justice. You see, people often mistake what we do here. They watch the viral clips, they see the arguments, and they think it is entertainment. They think it is reality TV. But for women like Elena, this is not entertainment. It is a matter of life and death. If I had let Marcus walk out of here with a fine and a slap on the wrist, I wouldn't just be failing her. I would be complicit in her continued torture. I would be telling every bully in this city that they can buy their way out of cruelty. And that is something I will never do. Justice, in my view, is not soft. It is not about making everyone feel good. It is about drawing a line in the sand and saying, this far and no further. Marcus crossed that line. He danced over it, he laughed at it, and because of that, he collided with the only force strong enough to stop him. I hope he thinks about that laughter tonight. I hope, as he sits in a cell that is smaller than his walk-in closet, wearing a uniform that isn't tailored, eating food that isn't catered, he remembers the moment he scoffed at a woman's tears. I hope he realizes that his laughter was the most expensive sound he ever made. It cost him his freedom, it cost him his reputation, and it cost him the delusion that he was above the law. To those watching, let this be a reminder. Do not mistake the patience of the court for weakness. Do not mistake a quiet demeanor for a lack of resolve. You can come into my courtroom with the best lawyers money can buy. You can come in with a three-piece suit and a golden tongue. But if you lack integrity, if you lack respect for human dignity, none of that will save you. The law is the great equalizer. It is the one place where a billionaire and a pauper stand on level ground. Today, the ground shifted beneath Marcus's feet, and he fell. But Elena, she stood tall, and helping her find that strength is the reason I put on this robe every single morning. We live in a world that often rewards the loud, the aggressive, and the ruthless. But in here, in this room, we reward the truth. We protect the quiet ones. We listen to the ones who have been silenced. Order has been restored, the bully has been removed, and tomorrow, the docket will be full again. New faces, new stories, new battles. But the standard remains the same. Accountability is not a suggestion, it is a mandate. Thank you for joining me in my courtroom. Walk with integrity, treat others with respect, and remember, actions have consequences. And if you forget that, I'll be here to remind you. Dismissed.